what I'd like to start off with is just, you have a lot of sessions, or pretty much all, I think, the other sessions that you'll hear today talk about modernization and talk about different technologies and how they'll help you modernize. This is probably the one session that's going to actually talk about, okay, well, how do you actually do all that? In other words, what's the steps you need to take? Who needs to be involved? When are we going to do it? What order are we going to do it in, right? Because these are all the things that you have to take into account. Regardless of what technology you're going to put into place, we actually have to have a plan, right? And so project portfolio management, it really should be project and portfolio management, because we see a lot of organizations moving away from project type structures to products or capabilities or services or whatever your choice of investment vehicle is. But the basic idea is that you are going to have a bunch of investment and a bunch of work you're going to do, and you need to have a way to plan around it, right? So, but why do we talk about innovation, right? Innovation fuels growth. Now, growth isn't necessarily the concept within the federal government. However, it's the idea of we want to do more with less, we want to do more with fewer resources, we want to do things faster, right? All of those things are based on our innovation. But there are some barriers to growth and to innovation. The first is that a lot of organizations use a bunch of different tools for managing your plans. In fact, 9 in 10 still use multiple project and portfolio management solutions for managing your work. Okay, so that's the first problem. And you can see over on the right some of the things that happen as a result of using so many different tools, right? We don't know what's going on. There's something going on over here. I don't know what's going on with that over there. We're repeating efforts. Ms. Aronson talked about this morning. There are all these pockets of people doing things because they're smart people and they want to do some of this stuff, right? But how do you pull it all together so that you can actually innovate faster, right? We're squandering our limited resources on low-value things, things that people might find interesting or curious about, excuse me. But they're not going to add value for the mission, right? Or we can't track to the people or the money the specific deliverable, right? We know what was supposed to have been chartered, and we know what we were supposed to be doing, but I can't get it all the way down to the specific thing that was delivered. We call that boots on the ground, right? There's a difference between the budget and the boots on the ground, and who fills the gap? How can we actually trace all the way back down, right? So that's the first block, right? Using different systems, a whole bunch of different systems out there. The second is that it takes us too long to plan, right? Almost 2/3 of organizations, it takes them forever just to plan something so they can get going, right? So, and the top comment on the right there is the one that I want to focus on just for a minute, which is organizational fatigue. Okay, it's something that we found in our research. We talked to literally hundreds of companies, and what happens is the following. You guys might put in a PPM system or some other planning system, right? And then what happens is that whoever put it in, especially if they're a governance body, says, okay, you must now fill out this 50 pages worth of stuff so that we can actually review all of it so that you can get your approval. At which point, people very quickly stop having new ideas or starting new projects because they realize that they're not going to want to do that. So they will find any possible way to avoid having to fill out your 50 pages. This is what we call organizational fatigue, right? It's the fact that they're tired of having to do what's necessary from the organization's perspective, so they work around it. And it doesn't need to be that way. And we'll talk about how we can shift left on the idea of planning, right? And then finally, the last piece is that 9 in 10 organizations tell us that our projects fail without proper analytics. And that goes with the AI conversations we've had today and have been talked about in various other sessions, right? But you need to have something that lets you see all of the data across all the things you're doing and basically figure out, okay, did we do the right things? How can we improve next time, right? Do we have the right data to even make a decision? Because again, remember, we're using a bunch of different systems, so we have to be able to bring it all together, otherwise I don't actually have the right data. Right? So these are the things that block innovation, right? And the things that slow us down. And so one thing to point out here, I mentioned, this is the one session that's going to talk about how do you do a modernization initiative, right? So this was a kind of an informal survey, but it was in a CIO forum. And they were talking about, okay, well, which of these technologies do you consider the most important? And this is kind of an eye chart in the way that they've presented it here. But I can kind of tell you the top three there at the top. The one that's highlighted, of course, is project and portfolio management, followed by application performance management, application release automation, service virtualization, capacity management, data mining, security management, API management, and so forth, right? And what I would point out to you is the key finding from this survey was that the further along you were in your modernization, the more likely you were to say PPM is important, because you'd already suffered from all of the problems I've talked about, right? Which is that you don't know what's going on. You don't have the right data. All these people are tracking all these plans in different tools. And we're supposed to be doing a modernization, and now I can't tell the stakeholders who are asking me for status on, hey, we said we were going to be at this point at this time, where is it? And you don't necessarily have an answer because it's all being tracked all over the place, right? So the concept here is that your project and portfolio management should be three things: simple, it should be usable, and it should be complete. And we talk about complete is probably the easiest one because a lot of PPM solutions are out there and most of them are fairly comprehensive, thus the organizational fatigue part, right? That we have to fill them all out and they have all these fields and we have to do all this stuff, right? The simple and usable is probably the new piece, right? And this comes to a generational thing, right? We were talking, Dr. Semele talked this morning about how in our mainframe side, for every person who leaves, we hire 2 new people, right? Well, those 2 new people have entirely different demands on the tools that they're going to be using and on the things that they're going to expect from their technology than people who might have started, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They want their tools to be simple, they want them to be usable, and and in some cases, they will make decisions about where they want to work based upon whether the solutions that they are asked to use are the ones they prefer. Right? And it's a complete sea change from when you used to have technology at work, right? Does everybody remember that you used to have to go to work to do a spreadsheet or to make a photocopy, right? All those, because the office technology was superior. Now I can take a picture on my phone and have a copy around the world in seconds, right? It's a completely different world, which means that the enterprise solutions you're asked to use have to compete, because otherwise, again, people work right around them, right? So let's talk about these 3 areas for how you can leverage project portfolio management in a way to help you speed up your innovation and address those 3 blocks I talked about at the beginning, right? The first is planning. So how many of you here do traditional portfolio planning or participate in traditional portfolio planning? Do your organizations do that? Okay. Let me ask a different question. How many of you have somebody, know somebody, or are working with somebody currently in an agency or your contractor that has a roadmap for something? You're building roadmaps. Okay, a lot more hands went up. And that's essentially what we've seen as the evolution, right? So I already talked about traditional investment planning, why it's so painful. There's a lot of things going on there, right? What people told us when we started talking about it was that the bottom-up approach doesn't work for people. You don't necessarily know what it is you're going to be doing when you get started. And some of these concepts are very agile concepts, and there's a flavor of that here. But this is really just at the planning level of, okay, we're going to make an investment, what are we going to do, right? I don't necessarily know. Let's throw some things up on the wall and see what we think, right? Why does prioritization fail? How many of you feel like you're really good at prioritizing? I hear some laughs. It's like, okay. I can tell you as a product manager, my job is a prioritization job. And there's actually a few publications out there that talk about ruthless prioritization, right? I get to make decisions about slicing things out of features that feel like I'm carving off parts of my soul, right? But that's because I need to deliver by a date. So that's part of what happens here is, right, okay, why do we fail in our prioritization? Well, because everybody wants everything right now. It's all the first priority, and I can't tell you which ones are more important than the other, right? So it fails. Well, we've got to have a way around that because not everything is number 1 priority and we have to have an order of delivery, right? And so what's missing from demand management? So part of the problem is that a lot of organizations feel like they can outsource their ideation or their opportunities for improvements, innovation, and so forth. But typically that doesn't work terribly well in practice. Because people especially who are boots on the ground, who are doing things day to day, like many of you in here probably do, are not necessarily going to have enough of the big picture to be able to really innovate, right? You're too focused on getting stuff done today, and what you need is to be able to plug your data into the people who are higher up on that picture to be able to say, oh, well, here's what the original thing we were trying to accomplish was, what the mission was, or what the sub-goal was. Maybe we should try a completely different way of accomplishing it. Why? Because that was the original goal. There's a whole new way of doing it, right? That's where the real innovation, the disruption comes from, is thinking about doing something an entirely different way. But you have to know what we were trying to accomplish in the first place, right? As opposed to the lower level detail of putting this in this system or being able to get something accomplished, right? So as I already mentioned, roadmaps in the new portfolio. Now, why are roadmaps so popular? If you take nothing else away from this presentation, roadmaps are a key to building shared understanding across stakeholders so that we can all throw it up on a wall and people can then look at it and respond to it. Because it's much easier to respond to a visual or something that people have recorded than it is to talk about it, right? This I can actually look at and say, oh, yeah, well, that thing you're doing in June, that's going to be impacted by this other thing that we're working on right now. Let's have a discussion, right? It gives you a way to have that conversation. It forms the foundation for it, right? And it also allows you to then take those bars on the right and group them or stack them into the relationship with what you're trying to accomplish on the left, right? And so in our model, for the way we do road mapping, there are 3 things that we found are really important for people who want to do this, and they're based on 3 very common metaphors that I'm sure that you work with. For example, how many of you, if you do a roadmap, and there were a few hands that went up, how many of you do your roadmap in a PowerPoint slide? Okay, there are a few hands, right? PowerPoint slides are very popular. Yep, nodding heads. Yep, what one of our customers called, I liked, arts and crafts, right? Changes made, got to move the box. Got to reshade the box. Got to do this other thing, right? So what we do here is we basically provide you a timeline. That's basically your PowerPoint slide, okay? So it allows you to do dependencies between the things. It allows you to add these little widgets over here that kind of give you the numbers if you want to have numbers on them and so forth. And of course, it reflects the fiscal calendar, which of course is important because you want to make sure that it's going to reflect your fiscal calendar for the federal government. So now, how many people here do Post-it notes? Have seen Post-it notes, have done Post-it notes, Kanban type Post-it notes, move things along the wall, right? Okay, so what we wanted to do is make it as easy as a Post-it note to get something in, right? So you simply go ahead and click on it, put in a few items, boom, you'll have yourself a virtual Post-it note, right? And then you can have a board of those. So you can basically have your little board of Post-it notes that can then allow you to move these items across a process that you've defined or whatever other groupings that you might have. I've seen processes where you move them between the columns because those are the stages they're in. I've seen columns where these are the owners of these items and you want to be able to show ownership in a very visual way, right? So we have the ability to do that too. And then finally, of course, how many people here like their spreadsheets? Right? Plenty of spreadsheet folks. You can see your information in your grid, which is your Excel spreadsheet, so you can get your information that way, right? And so if you take all 3 of these things together, right, which is your PowerPoint, your Excel, and your Trello board or Post-it note board or whatever else it is that you like, the key thing that we're telling you here is that, okay, remember we talked about it. Everybody's using all these different solutions. What we need to do is be able to pull it all together. So if you make a change in your PowerPoint slide, it'll update your Trello board and your Excel spreadsheet. If you make a change in your Excel spreadsheet, it's going to automatically update your PowerPoint slide or your Trello board without having to go back and do it yourself, right? What we're trying to do is take tools that people commonly use already today and tie them together because that's what speeds you up. What it does is it prevents you from having to remember to make those updates or prevents you from having to remember to communicate to somebody that something's changed, right? That what we're trying to do is we're trying to take all of the tools, make them usable, make them simple, but then also make them accessible in such a way that you can move things along and automate them, right? So that's the planning piece, right? So let's talk about execution for a second. How many of you have parts of your organization that are supposed to be agile? Agile is kind of a hot term, right? Agile organization. Okay. So one of the things about Agile that, and depending on where you are, and I'm going to use some buzzword terms here, depending on where you are in your Agile journey, you will have different people who think different things about what Agile is. Right? My favorite is the fact that there are some people who think that Agile means that I no longer have to be accountable to anybody for anything. right? I'm just, because, oh, well, we haven't finished that yet. Well, it's going to be done later. Don't worry, right? It's like, well, no, I needed it delivered like now. Where is it, right? So what we like to talk about is that, and the other thing too that's interesting is that really mature Agile organizations, and we have come on a 5-year journey ourselves. I'm in product management, software product management, right? We have come on a 5-year journey ourselves to be an Agile organization. And I like to think that we're pretty good now. But it's taken us 5 years to get there. And we had a lot of bad behavior. But we are now at a point, I think, where we could consider ourselves higher velocity than we were before. But I will tell you, it is more process than it was before, right? True Agile has more process than traditional. And it's because they have these things called ceremonies that you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to do your stand-ups. You're supposed to do your story points. You're supposed to do your big room planning. You're supposed to do all these things, right? So one of the things about that was that, okay, well, what if I have a group that's not software development? A lot of groups that are not software development that have to get stuff delivered, especially when you're doing modernization. What am I going to do for those folks? So we came up with this concept called the to-do scoreboard. And basically what it is I call it Agile without the ceremonies. These are groups that they don't care about story points. They don't care about Scrum. They don't care about sprints. That terminology is foreign to them, and they really don't care. What they want to know is there a way that I can simply identify the work that I need to have done, tell you how far we've gotten in it, and then move on to something else without having to make it a big production. So what is this? This is the to-do scoreboard. What basically is important about it is that in the center of the purple numbers are the score, right? And unfortunately, for the Capitals, the score was not a good one last night, right? Since they lost in overtime. But the idea is that in the center, you can always see on the scoreboard what the score is in terms of how much stuff is left, what time is remaining on the clock, which is how much time until we're due, right? Over on the far right, statistics that matter. Some of it is earned value like-ish, because what it's telling you is this is the pace we've been going up until now. Here's the amount you'd have to finish until the due date you've told us, and here's how it's going. Now down at the bottom, you can see a breakdown of who owns what. Now what are we talking about when we say the what? It's to-dos. What's a to-do, you might ask? A to-do is anything. It's a checklist. It's just a simple entry of here's an item, here's who owns it, here's a due date. And what we're doing here is we're aggregating it up across the entire system. So it doesn't have to be just one project. I could actually tell you on all my to-dos across everything that's going on that people have recorded, here's what our status is, right? And because it's a to-do, it's completely generic. I actually don't care if you're a legal team who has to process things through a legal function, if you're part of a modernization effort that's actually putting in a new system, or maybe the API gateway we saw earlier, right? Or if any of those types of things. Doesn't matter what it is. You got a bunch of to-dos? Great. What it does is it also makes the planning collaborative, right? In that Agile fashion that people like, which is that anybody can enter the to-dos. Just enter your to-dos and assign yourself to them. You can then also have your own to-do scoreboard, because the filters allow you to filter by to-do owner. So I can get a list of all the to-dos I'm supposed to own, right? So the basic premise here is that this allows you to execute in a more efficient manner and get that same monitoring people want, but not have to do all of the extra ceremonies involved, right? Okay. And then, of course, that same tie that I had before about the PowerPoint, the Excel spreadsheet, and the grid, yeah, that's all here too. It's not just for roadmaps. You can do it for projects. You can do it for programs. You can do it for products. You can do it for all these other things too. A lot of people like to manage your projects as a spreadsheet. It's fine. You can do that also, right? We like the to-do scoreboard more just because it allows that collaborative element, right? And now it's not just you managing it or as a PM or a program manager. It's somebody else who can contribute to it also. So I want to take just one other thought on execution and talk about this idea of, okay, so technology shops especially, what's the technology, what's IT doing? I need these new apps. I need these new functions. I need these new modernization things that are going on. And then there's a whole bunch of reasons why, well, we haven't gotten them yet. I'm waiting for systems to come up. I'm waiting for our test system environments to be more realistic because they're not actually reflective of production, right? I have systems that are too expensive, right? Lots of different complaints. And one of the reasons why these things happen is because of the lack of automation, right? And so one of the things that we talk about, and this is tying into another product that we have, the Rally product, is basically the idea of doing end-to-end planning and automation around your requirements, right? So you take a requirement. Actually, you start all the way at the roadmap. Start with your roadmap. You can then break it down into the things you want to deliver, deliverables. Those then break down into Rally, which basically becomes your requirements. Those requirements then automatically generate test cases, so that now what you can do is, and those test cases and those requirements can tie into your virtualized environment, so that if somebody is going to start work on something, it automatically kicks up their virtual environment for them, right? Because one of the challenges with Agile is that you can only be as agile as your infrastructure. If you're trying to develop on 2-week increments, but it takes you 3 days to get a test system, you're not going to go very fast. So there is an acceleration component here that is important. And so you talk about this Agile Requirements Designer, that basically is part of what it does, is it helps automate that whole part of the process, where after you get past your planning and you've started to execute. I talked about to-dos for the more generic things. If you're talking about specifically about technology and software, we're talking about the Agile requirements, right? Okay. And so you can do that whole thing throughout the entire software development lifecycle and be able to do your continuous requirements and testing. Okay. So that's the key piece of the automation. All right, so analyze. So the biggest problem with analyzing information is that it's not centralized. So that goes back to that first slide I showed, right? 90% of organizations still use multiple project systems. So if I wanted to actually tell you interesting information about your organization, it'd be really hard because you don't have it all in one place. Now I can tell you there's some interesting things about it. We as you might imagine, we are looking at AI and RPA and a whole bunch of other things around what we could do in projects. And for example, there are interesting correlations. Like, do you know that you can probably tell what skills you need on a particular project? There's about a 40% improvement in that if you just know what the project name is. Project name can tell you a lot of information. Now, is that useful? I don't know, because then people might start manipulating the names if they know that they're going to get certain resources based on it. But the premise is that there is stuff out there, right? There are those insights that people really want. But the challenge, of course, is getting it all in one place. So we provide a data warehouse in our product, in the Clarity product, to allow you to get all of that information into one place, right? And we also, more importantly, have started to provide trending functionality that allows you to snapshot the information so that you can start looking for the patterns I just described, right? Because that's part of the key of what you want to be able to do, right? And the other thing, too, we actually had this quote from one of the folks we work with on the data warehouse. It said, just in general, forget the trending or AI or anything else, right? Just ad hoc reporting. Having everything centralized allows you to save a whole lot of money and or resources just on your ad hoc reporting alone, right? Because again, remember, it's centralized data now. You can get it out instead of having to go call people or write emails or get all of the emails with spreadsheets attached and then download them all into a folder and then have to parse through them, right? You can actually have it all in one central location. Okay, and so that's the deeper analysis. And of course, you can use whatever BI tool you'd like because it's a data warehouse. Now we provide one, but if you prefer Power BI, ClickView, Tableau, go ahead. Doesn't really matter. Right? So one last thing, of course, because we are here at the federal, for an event for the federal government. You might be interested in FedRAMP. So Clarity PPM, we believe, is one of the first, if not the first, major PPM solution to have received an agency ATO for FedRAMP. And we are looking to have the final authorization from the FedRAMP PMO within the next few weeks, but they will work with us if you want it sooner than that. They will work with us to get you those documents so that you can start that process if you are interested in that. Okay, and it fits in as part of the overall broader Broadcom FedRAMP strategy and for the overall support system for FedRAMP. Okay, and so with that, that's Clarity PPM in a nutshell and why you might want to pay attention to it and champion it within your organization. And those are the types of things that we're looking for. I have 2 minutes and 49 seconds and counting, so you can either go start your lunch earlier, or if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them. And thank you very much for your time.